Thanks for joining me on episode 849 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Miles Wakeham. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, your treasures to live out your calling. Having the ability to live an unconstrained life is key, and one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend Scott Mader.
That it's based on your cultural norms and your society norms, and that means if you're dealing with someone from a different society or from a different gender that was raised in a different family or in a different culture, they may have different norms. So it may not be that they did something wrong on purpose in your eyes, what is wrong. Instead, they did something that was very moral within their norms.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about developing your influence through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about some of the key differences between ethics and morals. I share why knowing these differences matter, and I also share why we have to make both ethical and moral decisions each and every day.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read, and that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
Ethics and morals. A lot of times we use those two words interchangeably. We treat them as if they're the same thing. But the reality is that ethics and morals are subtly different ideas, and because of that, they have slightly different applications. Now, this isn't a value statement. This isn't ethics are good and morals are bad, or morals are good and ethics are bad. Instead, I think it's important to recognize that you probably exist in a situation where you sometimes are applying one and sometimes the other to your decision making. But I've often talked about, I believe intentionality is an important part of success. And that includes being intentional and recognizing when are you making an ethical decision, when are you making a moral decision, and does it matter? Thinking about it, in other words. So let's talk a little bit about the difference. So when you look it up on the web and you look up what is morals and what is ethics and what is the difference between them, you're going to find lists that basically boil down to a couple of different things. So morals are the beliefs of the individual or of the group about what is right or what is wrong, while ethics are guiding principles which help the individual or group make decisions about what is good or what is bad. Morals are general principles. They're set by the group. Usually they're set by the culture or the organization or something wider and bigger around you, where ethics tend to be responses to very specific situations. In other words, morals are customs and ethics are more about character, how you react. Because you could live in a situation where there's moral customs around you, but if you choose not to follow them or to follow them, that's more of an ethical decision. That's a decision about whether or not those morals fit in this particular situation. Morals are social or cultural norms, while ethics tend to be more individual, legal, and professional norms. Morals are about principles of right and wrong, and ethics are more focused on the context. So less absolutist, more is this right or wrong with this particular conduct at this particular point in time. Ethics tend to be what we apply in things like a business decision making, while morals may have more to do with your day-to-day decision making and more to do with just your personal life. Morals can be different in different societies and cultures, but ethics tend to be more uniform. Maybe not perfectly uniform, but much more uniform in their belief. Morals are generally rules and absolutist statements, while ethics tend to have a little bit more abstraction to them. So because of that, there's some confusion and overlap, but there's also some degree to which you have to recognize what you're doing. So moral principles may be things like don't cheat, be loyal, be patient, always tell the truth, be generous. These sorts of things are moral decisions, while ethics tend to be phrased more as truthfulness, honesty, loyalty, respect, fairness, integrity. In other words, they're the standards by which you run or govern an organization or yourself. Morals and ethics are a little bit different in terms of how they're governed, because morals are governed more by the society and culture around you, while ethics are determined more by outside abstract concepts of character that we bring into ourselves. And they're both important, because if somebody tries to do something and they abuse their power, and then they use their power and their position to save themselves, that would be immoral. And it would also be an ethical dilemma as well. Was it ethical to save somebody whenever they had committed a crime just because you had the power to do it? If you use your position to hire someone that's a close friend of yours instead of actually really openly interviewing, that's an ethical decision to do that. It's unethical in this case. So there's different ways that you can apply it to different situations. The important thing is recognizing, are you making this decision because you feel like it's good or bad or right or wrong in some sort of absolutist sense based on your culture, based on what's around you? If it is, then you're making a moral decision. And again, that doesn't mean that's a bad decision. But recognize that it's based on your cultural norms and your society norms. And that means if you're dealing with someone from a different society or from a different gender that was raised in a different family or in a different culture, they may have different norms. So it may not be that they did something wrong on purpose in your eyes, what is wrong. Instead, they did something that was very moral within their norms, but you view it as immoral because of your norms. That could create conflict. But oftentimes, if you can take the discussion back a step to an ethical position where you're talking about, do we both agree that honesty is important? Yes, most people would agree that honesty is important. The difference is, how does honesty play out day to day? What does that look like? Is a little white lie about somebody okay or not? That's more of a moral decision that can have differences based on your culture. And you make thousands of decisions in a week, a month, a year that fall into this moral and ethical kind of positioning. And when you think about it, it's important to recognize that where you fall on these decisions matters, because that's how your life plays out. So as you make a decision, reflect. Is this based on my morals and my cultural norms, or is it based on ethics that are more universally agreed upon? And if it is based on morals, have I clarified and made sure that we're operating from the same basic premise? And if not, then that's what the discussion needs to be about. But if you are, then you can recognize that the person was grown in the same cultural norm as you, and maybe it is actually that they're doing something immoral. And often they would also be doing something unethical in that situation as well. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, you can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 Talent Tips. That's Talent Tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.